right. Well, welcome, Mr. Russ Rosa. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. Say hi. Tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
Oh, Justin, you're so funny. Good afternoon. It's good to see.
Yes.
It's actually, I'm trying to figure how long it's been since we've seen each other.
Oh,
Uh,
God, in person?
yeah, it was down in Florida.
Miami. Yeah. And my sister was working at that restaurant. What the hell was the name of it? Chuck's or something. Yeah, that's got to be, I think I was still working at TSR.
You might have been.
I don't know. So it's got to be 20 years, I would
Is
guess.
that right?
Yeah. That'd be
Okay.
my guess. I don't really know.
We were
All of
20.
it, like I'm at the age now, dude, where like I can't remember anything. You know what I mean? Like
I do
it's
know.
all just, deleted. Like the hard drive is really just sort of trying to make it, you know what I
Listen,
mean?
that's, listen. I absolutely know what you're talking about, and actually, I'm still kind of dealing with the after effect of. I've had COVID a couple of times,
Hmm.
and I mean, listen, for all things, the one thing I can say I've experienced and it still has a lingering impact is like this memory, this fogginess that happens,
Really?
and I just kind of sit there just disconnected sometimes, and I'm just like, I don't recall anything, and it's one of those things. It's like, especially if I'm trying to work on something
Uh-huh.
and if I don't know it or can't intuitively figure it out, then all of a sudden it's like this haze comes over. I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm
And I have the same experience, but not only does well, not so much the haze, it's things start flying out of my hands when this has happened. You know what I mean? Like, I was just messing with some technology to like put together songs in a little songbook, and I had done it before, but it's
sure.
been a couple of months. Couldn't remember how it worked. Couldn't
It's,
remember how I did any of it. You know what I
that's
mean? It's
and this
insane.
stuff's supposed to be easier, and more intuitive. And I'm just like, yeah, let me just close this
Yeah,
laptop.
yeah, oh,
I'm gonna
yeah,
take a
exactly.
break.
So tell me about COVID, man. That's crazy. 3 times.
Yeah,
What was the first time? Was it before vaccine or after?
I had just gotten the vaccine, and it was right. Uh, when I had it the first time, I had just gotten both doses, which, you would have thought, I was ready to like catch bullets in my teeth, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
set. And I thought it was trying to kill me. Like it came after me like I owed money to somebody.
Hmm.
And I mean, just knocked me out. And I remember, I honestly have remember, and this is back when it was still like COVID classic,
Hmm.
when it was like
Before they came out with new
new
COVID,
COVID, right? Diet COVID, like all that other
COVID
stuff.
zero sugar.
Yeah, that's all the new COVIDs were coming. But
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
back in the old days when, everybody had like, 2 weeks of solid quarantine. And then
Hmm.
once your 2 weeks were done, you're free to do what you have to do. But everybody else in the house then began their 2 week cycle. And I mean, we had a whole thing. Melissa had gotten it first, and she,
Is she still nursing?
she's still
Is, is,
nursing.
is that how she got it?
No, she actually got it because she and my son Braden went out to Indiana to see Logan, who was working near Purdue University at a country club out there.
Hmm.
And um, they came back, and Melissa tests positive for COVID. So she's a nurse. She works in the delivery room, so she can't be anywhere near those babies. And
Hmm.
this is still when everything was still emerging. So we go into lockdown here at the house. She's 2 weeks in our master bedroom, and I'm sleeping on the couch, and kids are all around. And then after her 2 weeks, the on her last day, Braden tested positive. So everybody back down in for another 2 weeks, and wait for him to clear. And then we started having what was it? That, like, my other son then picked it up, and I mean, by the time we were done, it was 7 weeks of us being quarantined. I was ready to die in this house.
I
It was
bet.
ridiculous.
Hmm.
uh, and at this point when COVID comes, I'm just like, hey, how you doing? Been 6 months, where you been? But
Have you found and our old friend Steve Kelly, he went to the hospital. He was in the hospital for a couple days. I don't think he went on a respirator, thank God, because
Right.
apparently that was like the death knell. Like
Yeah, yeah. You do that, it's over.
throw that thing on and you're probably gone, right? But yeah, he was in the hospital for a couple days with it.
Oh, poor kid. Did it hit
Yeah.
you?
I had it once, very mild. Um, Nothing really to speak of. I had the first two shots, and I haven't boosted since, honestly. And we can get into skepticism if you want to, but
Listen, I
but
I walk around. I walk around like I'm like, where are you, COVID? I know you out there. You
yeah,
know.
yeah, and it's different for everybody. I I found that here in Florida is a very different experience, because I've worked remote for like, gosh, it's probably been 15, 16 years since I went to an office.
Nice.
And so, like the whole lockdown thing, that wasn't that different, but I was traveling for work a lot, obviously. So I stopped traveling, like never. And like, so, like, I work at home, everything's shut down. Like, I spent a very long time, like, not going many places, like most
Mhm.
people, but everything opened up, a couple months after we did the lockdown here. And a lot of our friends, I probably know 10 or 15 people from the Northeast that moved to Florida because of the free state of Florida being open,
Sure.
including our common friend Lucy, right? So,
Uh,
well, she's still bouncing around the place, but bounced around a couple of places. But yeah, it was a very strange experience for everybody, I think, but it really didn't affect me health wise at all. Thank
no,
you.
consider yourself lucky.
I know it. I
The
know it.
last My last COVID battle was at Christmas this last year,
Hmm.
and that showed up with that the what was the side effect? The body myalgia, which is like a head to toe nerve pain,
Hmm.
and I didn't know what was going on. At first, I felt like a little sore and a little achy, and then the next thing I know, like the next day, I'm like, "What is this? Like rigor mortis? Like what is happening to me?"
Wow.
Oh, it was awful. Like I honestly remember the debates that I would have in my head. I'm like, all right, well, I probably should go use the restroom, the bathroom, but I don't know if I really need to go. I was like, 'cause
Like a cost
oh,
benefit analysis, right? Like, okay,
absolutely,
let's say I
absolutely.
poop my pants, right? Like, what's the
Listen,
worst thing?
listen. I had to argue my way out of, this was really why I married a nurse, right? Like, I shouldn't have to leave this bed at all, and it
That's
should
right.
be sanitized and ready for me to keep going, right?
Yeah, ring the little bell. Oh
Oh,
dear.
honey, yeah, where's
Yeah.
that? Ding, 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 ding.
By the way, can you refill the morphine drip for me too,
Yeah,
please?
I need something. I need a quick little bump.
Yeah, a little bump, a little bump. So, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I've seen a lot. Obviously, you and I are friends on Facebook, and you
Mhm.
do a lot of posting about your business and coaching people and sort of that whole thing. And I'm really interested to hear about, what that's like. How did you get into it? And tell us a little bit about, what you do for folks.
Well, so coaching was never anything that I had on my radar, right?
Hmm.
It was just something that eventually organically developed for me. And if you recall, back in the day, I had my retail business
Yeah.
and was doing well there. And then 9/11 had happened, and I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, there is a recession on the way, and I'm like, I should probably bow out of this and try to recalibrate and see what I'm going to do. And at that same time frame, Melissa decided that she wanted to transition to full time at work, and there was an opportunity for her to go into labor and delivery, which for her was what she wanted more than anything else.
Hmm.
So we did this whole role reversal, right? All of a sudden, I came home. I'm now the stay at home parent, and she's gainfully employed doing her thing at the hospital. And I just found myself in a situation where I was like, all right, well, here I have this inflection point in my life. I now have, I have the babies that I'm dealing with. And how am I going to create for myself, an opportunity to kind of sharpen my skills and, become more marketable, um, you know, when I'm ready to go back into the workplace. So I started looking at a bunch of different programs for leadership development and, just trying to broaden the scope of my skills. And, I really found it very engaging, right? Like it really was something that was speaking to me. And, as I kept going through a series of different seminars and trainings and communication and effectiveness and, systems design and all these other things that I was doing, uh, I found that the further along I went, there were just more and more opportunities showing up for me.
Mhm.
Sometimes it was people who were in the program with me who would reach out and say, hey, I'd like your opinion, or maybe you can help me coach some of the folks in my business. And it just started happening like that. And then funny enough, at, 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 at this particular juncture, I happened to get some communication from Villanova, where their MBA program was one of the first in the country to create a coaching program for the executives in the MBA. And I was like, oh, like, I was really excited. I was like, this is perfect, right? And, with that being our alma mater, I'm like, this should be no big deal.
Huh.
So I went in, I met with the dean, had a great conversation. By the end of the conversation, he's like, would you please join our coaching group, and we'll assign a couple of these executives to you, and your job is to support them in being effective, and not only their approaches for their academics, but really develop their leadership presence, right? Because that's what they're there for. And it went really well. Like I really enjoyed the opportunity to interact with these folks. And I mean, if you're going to be a coach and you're looking to coach executives, what better place than to go to a MBA program in a top university where these folks have already self-selected, themselves to develop themselves as effective leaders.
Yeah.
And it was such a happy accident, right? Um, but then the next thing I know is what started really evolving from that was that, these folks that I was coaching while they're getting their MBA invariably would call me up and be like, hey, you know what? My boss has noticed the difference in my effectiveness and my leadership presence, and how I'm collaborating and really reimagining our business. And would you come in and do the same for my team, or our division? And I was like, sure.
Let me go write some content and then I'll
Yeah,
be
right.
happy to,
Like
right?
I am making this up on the fly, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It is just almost like rifting, right?
Yeah.
But I had a couple of real fundamental principles and things that I would work with people on, and uh, and that just evolved over time into my business. And
Mhm.
I've been doing coaching now for 22 years,
It's
and
amazing.
it's wonderful,
It is wonderful.
and what's funny is the majority of our clientele are still those folks from Villanova that I coached over the years, because they've progressed in their
Yeah.
careers, and they just like, oh, I one guy went to a new company. He became the CEO of an organization down in what was in Greensboro, South Carolina, I think is where he was. And he's like, listen, I need a complete cultural redesign for my business, you know, uh, come on down. And I was like, this is what I felt like I was made for. So it's just been this organic development over time. It's wonderful because it gives me a tremendous work-life balance. I work from home most of the time, and it's usually over the phone or on a Zoom like this, which is great.
Mhm.
Makes it very easy for me. And then on the occasions that I get to interrupt that with a trip to some business someplace, I get to go down and be with all the muckety mucks for a week or so.
Yeah,
I walk in like a celebrity, and they go out of their way to show me a good time, and I get a couple of years worth of work out of that, and it's been good,
that's
and
amazing.
it's even getting better. So
So I have a bunch of follow-up questions from just what you
sure.
just said there. But the first is like when you first started there with Villanova,
Uh-huh.
were you being paid by the college? Were you
Oh,
being
sure.
paid by the okay, so it was
Yeah,
like
no,
part of the MBA program is you get this coach sort of thing.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
college hired me as a contractor,
Yeah.
and it really helped me kind of, hone my conversation in
Hmm.
a way that, you have a certain amount of time to work with these folks.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to make sure I was efficient.
Hmm.
And so that whole process really started the whole thing out. I was directly for Villanova. At some point, the university was like, well, we don't condone you working with these folks out of the design of the program. And I'm like, well, I don't understand why the hell not, because you know I don't know what that has to do with the university anymore,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And it was a bunch of nonsense. But
That's
I had a couple of years that I did at Villanova. It was like 4 years of coaching there, and then that's it. Everything else has been word of mouth, and several of the folks that I still coach today had already graduated the MBA program, and when they would come back as alumni of the program and kind of speak to the new folks that were in the class, if they were somebody that I had coached, they would say, well, they have a coaching program here, but here's Russ Rosa.
right. Here's what you
Oh,
actually
yeah, well, because
need.
coaching's a really kind of can be real flaky sometimes.
Yeah.
A
Hmm.
lot of times it shows up like bad therapy,
Yeah.
where
Mhm.
people are like, we're going to practice breathing, Justin, let's try. And I'm just like, listen, if you showed up and you need breathing exercises with me, like, a doctor,
100%, dude. Because I had this experience where the company I was working for at the time hired some outside person because it was like a leadership development
yeah, yeah,
program,
yeah.
and I forget that it's a well-known company. I can't remember who it was, but it was to me it was worthless. It was
Most of
like
it's bullshit.
yeah, it was all like I read a lot, like, and at that time in my life, 20s and 30s, I read mostly self-help and business books, right?
Sure,
Like, how do I
sure.
get my head right and how do I make a lot of money was
Yes.
basically my thing, right? So like everything they'd talk about, I'd be like, yeah, I read that, like, you know what I mean? So totally cool. I want to get more into that. So you said before too, like there were certain principles that you sort of were the foundation of what you started to do at Villanova and then continued on. So what are those principles?
Well, what we're looking to do when we're dealing with a client, right, with an
Mhm.
executive, is I begin by really pointing out that my job is to have an impact on your experience of your own effectiveness. The reality is, you're already successful, you've been able to accomplish a lot, and you're an intelligent person. Clearly, you couldn't be where you are without, succeeding that way. But it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how effective you've been. There's a point where what you know tops off.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, I mean, intelligent people do everything that they know how to do to the best of their ability to try to resolve an issue.
Mhm.
And if what you know happens to, coordinate with the circumstances, well, then congratulations, you're effective, right? You're able to succeed. You're someone who has the answer, and we live in a culture that loves people that have answers, right?
Mhm.
But the only constant in the universe is change. So if the circumstances, when they invariably change, if you don't change, then what you're left with is just feeling stuck.
Hmm.
So we really look to see what does it take to get beyond the limits of your understanding, because that's the domain of innovation. That's the domain of reimagining something, and really questioning and challenging what we know and what we understand.
Mm.
Because ultimately, if you're going to have a solution to a problem you don't have an answer for, you're going to have to make it up. You
Yeah.
know, and and people don't operate that way. I mean,
Yeah.
they're looking for certainty. They're looking to operate based on what they know and what they understand, and if they don't know it, they tend to kind of feel limited by that.
That's a
So
Hey, all right, it's the country. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Justin Weller. Here we rely on premium subscribers to produce this show and all of our content. If you like what we're doing, would you consider heading over to www.thecountry.news, where you can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. Please also subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this show, and follow us on the X, where you'll find us under the handle @JWTheCountry. Thanks so much. Now on
That's
to the
a
show.
wonderful insight. I really love that. There's this guy named Scott Adams. Do you know who he is? He writes the Dilbert cartoon,
yeah, sure.
and
I to that degree.
but he does all these other things, and he's got a couple books on that issue. I just started one. I've only read the preface, but he basically said this sort of thing in different ways. Like, basically people work towards goals, and
Mm,
that is effective in that space where the thing, like you're
sure.
talking about. But the book is all about how he's taught himself how to do all these things and he does it by using systems, right? Like
Yes.
a system to teach yourself something new, or a system to develop ideas, concepts of what you should do when you're in that, what I would call, chaos environment, right? Like that's really what you're talking about, structure versus chaos,
Right.
right? I know what to do in my safe little space. Like you think of like a little kid, right? Like the 2-year-old, and they want to go out and sort of move away from their parents, but not too far, right?
Right.
And the best parents, they let them go. They let them go as far as they want to, and they don't stop them. You know what I mean? Because the kid knows
Hmm.
when it's too much, almost always, and they come back. So yeah, so is that sort of what you're talking about, like developing systems internally in your mind to be able to deal with chaos or the unknown, I guess.
Well, it's not necessarily a system. The way I speak about it is about bringing distinction to a particular issue.
Hmm.
So a distinction, just for the purposes of what we're talking about, is
Excuse me.
something that itself doesn't exist, but it makes something else available. You know, and it's it's kind of like let me break it to you this way, like the phenomenon of what it is to distinguish something. Like if you and I were talking about riding a bike, right? The mechanics of riding the bike are really simple. You hold on to the handlebars, you sit on the seat, you pedal. That's what riding the bike looks like. But, that's not enough to have you do it successfully, right? Now, if we put you on a bike and you have some training wheels and stuff, you can go from point A to point B, no big issue. But once those training wheels come off, you know, what you're doing won't have you successfully ride, right?
Hmm.
So we have to have a conversation and we have to look to see, well, what's missing? What do you need to distinguish for yourself? What is it that you have to experience so that you can successfully ride the bike? Now, we could answer the question, well, what does Justin need to know in order to ride the bike? And we could say, well, he needs to know how to balance, right?
Hmm.
Now, if you have the answer, notice our culture loves answers, right? So
Hmm.
once you have the answer, if you and I were, next to each other, you're riding the bike, I'm holding to the back of your seat, and we're kind of building up speed. I'm like, remember, Justin, what you need to know is balance. The answer to riding the bike successfully is balance, and I let you go, you're likely going to fall, right? Like that's just how that happens. So, you know, how you know balance is you don't have an academic or a conceptual relationship to it. It's actually something that you had to experience. It's heuristic in nature, right? So once you distinguish that for yourself, like you now have it, right? And it doesn't matter whether or not you know, today's the first day you've ridden a bike or it's been 20 years since you've been on one. You know, it'll take you a minute or two to kind of figure it out and you're back into that, you know, dynamic again.
Mm-hmm.
So we look to say then, what is it to distinguish leadership, right? Now, people have a whole bunch of concepts about leadership. There's 1,000 books on what it is to be a leader. And all those books accomplish is giving you a bunch of concepts. Now, the concepts can be helpful because when they're applicable, great. But when they're not, you're stuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have a relationship to leadership that broadens the horizon of options for you, right? Because if you don't have the ability to broaden the scope of your consideration, you're just going to be constrained and limited by what you think you know or what you know happens to be the case and work out for you.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing in the nature of the work that we're doing is we're distinguishing leadership, which really empowers people to be able to create new answers for themselves, right? They design systems to produce the outcomes that they need. They create a culture that can align with a vision or a mission for an organization, you know, and that's kind of what, you know, we're hammering away at with folks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a what's the phrase? There's a phrase from the Heidegger, from the philosopher Heidegger. He talks about a condition that um, he talks about the suchness of things, or even, you know, it is a certain way. It's a condition that he calls the tranquilized obviousness. You know, like when people, and I'm sure you've heard in business before, when people will say, you know, they reach the limit of their ability to impact something, and then they'll say, well, Justin, you know, it is what it is, right?
The
And
worst phrase, perhaps. Yeah.
yeah, listen, the
No,
second
it's
that
not.
was
No, it's
uttered,
it is not what it is.
no,
Somebody made it that way,
exactly,
and you
and
can unmake it that way, right?
exactly,
The question is, are you willing to do what it takes to unmake it?
indeed,
Right?
indeed,
Yeah,
and listen, another version of that sounds like, well, everybody knows.
yeah. Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. You know that song? It's a Leonard Miller song. It's fantastic.
Okay. All
Yeah, yeah.
right. And then what's the other one? Everybody knows, or no, here's the other one. We've always done it this way, you know.
Mm-hmm. The
And
sacred cow. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And when that's the narrative in the culture, I can tell you at that point, all leadership is stopped.
Mm-hmm.
There's no innovation. There's
Mm-hmm.
no imagination.
Yeah.
Mostly, you know, whatever the condition of the business is topped off.
Yeah.
So, you know, our job is to interrupt that condition and kind of press through and create a whole new domain for inquiry, a whole new domain for design, you know, and really just kind of press through, you know, where we seem to be all self-absorbed in having an answer and being right about something. You know, there's a quote from Socrates where he says, the first half of wisdom is an inquiry, is a
Mm-hmm.
question. And the more powerful the question, I say, the more powerful and greater potential there'll be for multiple answers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a powerful inquiry and you have multiple answers, and whatever answer you were working with has topped off, you have other directions from which you can act versus, you know, this is my square peg, and I'm going to jam this square peg in any shaped hole that I come into, and that's how that's going to be, you
Yeah.
know, and plenty of people, you know, masquerade as leaders that way, you know, using that methodology.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like going back to that concept, and like this is the way we've always done it, right? Like
Uh-huh.
part of that is people are victims of their own success, right?
Oh,
You
sure.
built this business, it's doing well, it's you've gotten to a level of achievement that you know maybe didn't expect or you know
Sure.
that you're comfortable with, and so you're like you stop working on the problem,
Oh, sure.
basically, right?
Absolutely.
And how do you overcome that? Because that's a very hard, like how do you keep, and actually I want to ask it this way, because there's like you know there's athletes that don't care, right? Like the Tom Brady's of the world.
Hmm.
He's the best on the planet and he's always trying to be better, right?
Sure.
That's very very uncommon in my experience. So
Yeah.
how do you break through with somebody that's sort of at a level and they're sort of comfortable, they you know they may not seek coaching, so maybe that's you just you know you don't deal with them, but is there a method to help people sort of break through that plateau or that you know that place that they're at?
Well, it really begins with their experience, right? Like if it's one of those things where um, coaching comes on like an imposition, and it's a top-down mandate, and it's like, well, they hired me to, work with you.
No, yeah,
I'm
school you up.
feeling, oh man, those folks, they tend to be pretty rigid, pretty resistant, and that's all right, because that's I've seen a lot worse.
Yeah.
So, you know, um, but a lot of the times it's very, it's a challenge unless we're having a conversation about, for someone who is a victim of their own success, there's always those people definitely know and categorize the areas where they haven't been successful.
Hmm.
And that's where, I don't need to coach you in places you're already effective. What the hell is that going to be?
Right.
Right. But there was a deal that, didn't turn out, or there was an initiative that, eventually just faded away. But at one point it seemed to make sense to you. What's that all about? What does that look like? What was your experience of going through a time like that? And
Mhm.
just kind of bringing that kind of inquiry into the space with folks. Um, but more often than not, I mean, listen, it's great when you have someone who's effective and wants to be coached. But more often than not, when I'm brought into a situation, it's a shit show. You know, it's it's terrible. Like it's
Yeah.
like you got people who are like on their last gasps of air, and they're all struggling. And sometimes we come in, because the company just feels they have to demonstrate that, all right, well, we tried to help you out, we tried
Hmm.
to make it right
Like
for you
the last step before we kick you out the door.
before we throw you out
Yeah,
the
yeah,
door,
yeah,
before
yeah.
we realize it's over. And
I've seen that movie.
yeah, but I'll tell you, that's the best time for me because I'm like, look,
Nothing
it's
to
already
lose.
terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't make it any worse. So let's have a conversation, right?
Let's try some shit and see if something breaks,
Let's see
right?
what works here, right? Because it's really funny because that's when people get really honest with
Hmm.
their experience.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm really at. Here's what I see is happening. Here's where I know I failed. And I mean, people lots of times get pretty open and vulnerable in these conversations. I mean,
Yeah.
everything that I deal with is 100% confidentiality. It's written in all of my contracts and everything. I do not tell you, if you hired me to work with an executive in your organization, I am not here to tell you what's going on in that conversation. All of my work gets demonstrated in the shift in effectiveness in this particular executive. And if there's certain outcomes that we're looking for, certain value creations that we're looking to establish, listen, then that's what my job is, right? To
Mhm.
help this executive transition in such a way that they reinvest in their own effort, and they look at the opportunity to reinvigorate their own sense of self and accomplishment.
Mhm.
Because they're lots of times these folks are just beat.
Yeah.
They've reached a limit, but it's only a limit of how they currently think. It's not the true limit of what's available.
Mhm.
And I often speak about it like, if I can just move you 1 degree from where you're at, that 1 degree shift could radically transform how things
Mhm.
occur for you. Because I'm not coming to you with answers. That I'm not a professor or a teacher. That's not the nature of my relationship, right? My job is to challenge the limits of your point of view and to flank how you look at things. Because the opportunity for you is, you don't need to agree with me, but what you can do is you can stand on the shoulders of my conversation, and when you're standing on the shoulders of my conversation, then let's look at your issues, right? And from this new perspective, because it's going to be new to you, from this new perspective, when we look at what you're up against, what do you see now, right?
Mhm.
What problems or limits that you were struggling with before, do they even exist in this new perspective? What new challenges do you see that maybe didn't occur from you how you were seeing things earlier? So it's just a matter of making that slight 1 degree pivot. And if
Mhm.
you can do that, if I can get you to move 1 degree, I can get you to move two.
Yeah, we're going,
I can
right?
get you two. Yeah,
It's the flywheel, right? Like little marginal improvements that positive that compound over time, right?
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. That
And
makes
that
perfect sense.
creates it just creates a whole new dynamic for folks.
Yeah. So I've been wondering. I want to ask two different sort of absolute questions to get you to talk about a couple of things.
Sure.
Does every executive need a coach?
Um, that's a good question because my reflex is, yeah, of
Fuck
course.
yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
do,
because
right?
everybody gets to a limit. I
does
don't
does
care.
I don't know who would you say is the greatest leader in business today? I don't know. Um, does Elon Musk need a coach?
Elon Musk could definitely use a coach.
Why?
Uh, because I think for as intelligent as he is,
Yeah,
right, there is something for him to gain in terms of his ability to be relatable, to understand
connect. Yeah,
the interaction of people.
yeah,
He's such a brilliant guy
yeah.
that he might come off as out of touch for a lot of folks.
I think he is out of touch for a lot of folks. I think he actually has Asperger's, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that's true. I
And
believe I
so,
heard he had a
yeah,
form of Asperger's is
he's
like
autistic.
it's
Maybe. Yeah, I
autistic.
thought it was that Asperger's, but maybe not. I don't remember. But yeah, I see that for sure.
Sure.
Um,
And listen, a lot of folks who have, a particular condition like that,
mhm.
it we might relate to it in some circles as, that's a problem, it's a limiting factor. But for other folks, I mean, they're like a savant,
Mhm.
and they have this singular kind of focus that just has them be relentless in getting things done
Yeah.
you know so it's all a matter of how you spin it, right?
For sure. So, is there a business leader that you think is the shining example of leadership today? Is there one out there?
That's a good question. um I don't know necessarily that I'm measuring leaders in terms of their overall effectiveness. I mean, I'm a fan of Warren Buffett's.
Hmm.
uh I think he's brilliant, and what I really like about him is how accessible his conversation is, and how relatable he is.
Yeah.
um, but more so, I find myself looking at people who are in this kind of conversation, like a guy, Gilbert Schultz. He's a guy, actually, I was speaking to him earlier this morning. He's out in Australia. Gilbert's a genius. I mean,
Hmm.
just a genius. And he's someone who, really has very little patience for what he sees as the nonsense of how we've kind of just organized our cultures and our societies. He's like, no one is looking to revolutionize how work is done or how life is lived. I happen to really really enjoy Werner Erhard. Werner is he's currently up in Harvard, and he's doing a lot of leadership work and development up there. I studied under him a couple of times. Fernando Flores, another philosopher, he's from Chile. Brilliant guy, does exceptional work in the construct of language and the ability for language to evoke and manifest outcomes for people. So that's
Mhm.
more the tone of where I'm at, because I really believe not necessarily that we're coming from who's an exemplary leader. I look at it more through the lens of everyone has the ability to express themselves as an effective leader and as an effective executive, and what are the barriers to their own expression, you
Mhm.
know because at some point someone might have concluded, yeah, not me. And I
Mhm.
want to start with, why not? you know
Right.
what is it about you that you feel disqualifies you from being an executive or being a
Mhm.
leader? um it's funny because the where I got my real hardcore training um, was in a project that I participated in right after 9/11. So I remember, 9/11. Obviously, we're old enough to have very clear reflections on that day. And
Yeah.
I remember coming home in the morning, racing back to the house because my sister's in Manhattan. I have family that was working in the World Trade. Like, I was like, what's going on, right?
Mm.
And terrible. And I remember watching the tower fall while I'm holding my 6-month-old son, and I'm just devastated by the world that I brought this kid into, right? And I'm so struck by this just violence. Now, one of the things that I remember picking up in some of the trainings that I had done was recognizing that violence is a form of communication, right? That when people are completely at a limit and when speaking no longer works, violence is how people tend to express themselves. Now, here we're watching an event that has a global impact. It's obviously international, and I'm just looking at all of this, and I'm like, I'm not a global guy. I'm here in Pennsylvania. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
like
Not a
scratching
lot
my
going
head.
on in Wallingford, right?
Yeah, I'm
That,
Wallingford. Like, what are no one doing? I'm not, no one at the UN is calling for me. And I was like, wow. But I'm so clear that there was so much violence, being expressed that day.
hmm
I'm like, there's got to be a way to impact that. And that kind of started to cobble a couple of conversations together. And some of the folks that I was in different trainings with, we formed an end violence project, and we looked to be like, all right, well, where can we go and make an impact, right?
hmm
And one of the people who was in this narrative and this conversation with us happened to be the warden for the Riverfront Penitentiary in Camden, New Jersey. And he's
Wow.
like, I got 800 violent people right now, waiting
hmm
for you.
Come on
So,
down, fix it,
uh,
right?
well, I mean, we're like, all of a sudden, this sounds like a good idea, right? So, so we decided to form a project where we were going to lead a seminar in effectiveness, right, and in leadership, because one of the things that we did conclude was, here you've got all these criminals, and for the people who need to be there, I have no issue with the fact being they're incarcerated, right? That's where you belong. You did some terrible stuff. You deserve to be here. But on the flip side of that is that, for the most part, unless these are guys who have a life sentence, at some point they're going to get out, right? And when we stop and look at something, you know, they these folks all came from some community somewhere where the model of leadership that they had were the drug dealers, the pimps, the criminals, right? So now prison isn't the problem that we all think it is, it's actually the fulfillment of the promise of that culture,
Hmm.
of their community.
Hmm.
And they're, if they go back to their community, well, they're going back to that culture, back to that narrative, and it's a real easy uh circumstance for them to kind of, just recalibrate, because prison, at least in the prison talk, is, they inmates call it the university, or they went to college, right?
You learned
And
how to be a professional
they
criminal,
learn how to be a better
right?
crook, right?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
they did. And they come out now with skills, right?
And contacts, right? They met a lot of
and,
folks.
and they
Like,
know everybody, right?
yeah,
They're
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's so
So
sad, man. It makes me think of, you remember me at 18. I was a serious nerdy bookworm, dude. And that, like, one of the things I loved reading as a teenager was Isaac Asimov and
oh, sure.
the Foundation series. And
Uh-huh.
one of the quotes that stuck in my head was, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent."
Yes.
And it kind of is what you're talking. Like, you try to solve this problem with your mouth,
Mm-hmm.
and like you don't get very far, or you get to a point and you can't solve it anymore, and
You
put
take
cow,
your
right?
gun, yeah, you punch somebody, you take your gun out, and you kill them, and
but
problem solved, right?
but yeah, but then the other thing I was thinking about, because I had this conversation actually on another podcast recently, I forget the story, but it's some awful story about some young kids that like basically ran over somebody with a car and
Sure.
showed zero remorse, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, look, and he's like, lock him away forever, done.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I I I like Solzhenitsyn. Have you ever read the Gulag Archipelago?
No.
It's fascinating. It's this dude that lived in Soviet Russia in, like, I forget, like 70s, 80s, that time frame. He
Mm-hmm.
was writing this book while he was in a gulag,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't allow you paper and pencil.
Right.
And so as he's working, he's sort of writing the sentences and then also trying to memorize them.
Wow.
So that eventually he figures out how to like publish this underground, and it goes wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
And like, obviously there were a lot of factors that ended the Soviet Union, but people in Russia say that's part of the reason is I read the Gulag Archipelago.
Wow.
Anyway, that's a long way to say one of the wonderful things that he says is like, if only there were some evil people out there
Mm-hmm.
and we could just go and slaughter them all, and evil would be gone. But the problem is that evil and good runs directly down the center of every person's heart.
Sure.
And that's your point, is like, these people are victims of the environment and the structures and the system that they grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's something, I was thinking about this earlier today for God knows why, but like, the further you get in that sort of violent, whatever you want to call that, that place where they grew up, and the
Uh-huh.
the violence is around, the longer you experience that, the harder it is to come back, I think, right?
Sure.
Like, if you just
Sure.
expose a little bit, you're good. But like, everybody has good in their heart, I believe. And I know
Sure.
that sounds crazy. Some people are like, hey, you're just bleeding heart. But no, I think everybody has the potential to change their life and walk away from evil and violence and those sorts of things. But
Indeed.
it's very, very hard to,
It
right?
is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, listen, consider that, evil, for, if we're going to try to categorize something,
Yeah, whatever you want to call it, right?
whatever
Like,
you want
yeah,
to call it,
yeah,
it
yeah.
is not, endemic in people's experience. A lot of hatred is learned, right?
Mhm.
So, what is it to offer some kind of an alternative for people to be able to, learn something new, right?
Mhm.
Which was really what the impetus was for us when it came to this particular project. We wanted to try to create a new model of leadership that empowered these inmates in a way that they knew they could make a qualitative change in their world. So, I mean, these guys were incarcerated. They weren't getting out of jail, I mean, we 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 had people who, in order to be in our project, you had to at least still have 2 years in your sentence, right? Because I wanted to make
Mhm.
sure that we could really lock this down.
Mhm.
So we had folks that were coming in that, they saw a horizon, and our program was one of, a dozen different offerings at the prison. But we really look to be like, we have to have you have an experience of making a difference, right?
Mhm.
Now, you happen to be in prison where every aspect of your life is controlled. We're still challenging you to look to see how can you be effective here. So, for instance, I love this one inmate. He's a lifer. His name's Ezra. Ezra was in for a double murder, and he's never getting out. But as a lifer, in jail, the guys who are lifers, they realize this is their community, and they're the guys who pretty much run the show, in terms of the culture. And Ezra eventually worked his way to the point where his prison job was to run the AV squad in in the prison.
Uh-huh.
And what he did was, he would have an inmate if a new cellmate came in, and every once in a while he'd get a new one. He'd be like, "Man," he's like, "I could smell the streets on these people." He's like, "It's ridiculous, right?" This boy child who comes in, or this man boy who comes in, thinks he's going to step up to me. It's like, I killed two people. He's like, "I don't care what you did, how tough you were out there. We're in a different, there's different equation in this place."
Yeah.
But he had this one guy who came in who was serving 8 to 10 years for dealing some drugs, and he was a young guy. He was like, in his early 20s, and he had like three children, like three, two, and one, right? And it was devastating for him to not be with his kids and his family. So, Ezra was one of the inmates in our project, and he reasoned that he has this AV equipment here. He could use it to make a difference with his cellmate. So what he did was, he got a couple of kids' books together, and he videoed his cellmate reading the books, right,
That's
as
so
if it were
cool.
the good night story, right?
Mhm.
And then they took the VCR tape, because that's how far back this goes, and the books, and sent that to
Mailed
his
it.
wife,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it completely shifted his cellmate's experience, right?
Mhm.
Because then, the kids had a real experience of dad reading, these books to them at night, and the wife would play, the tapes as the kids, anytime they wanted to see their dad, here he is reading, there's a monster at the end of this book, like that,
Mhm.
right? And but what happened was, other cellmates, other inmates in the prison started requesting, the opportunity to do the exact same thing for their kids or their
Mhm.
grandchildren, right? And this project took off. I mean, all of a sudden, and the warden was 100% with it. He's like, why the hell not?
Right.
And I mean, it still goes on today. It's into the many, many thousands of inmates who, I remember there was this one prison up by Loretto, Pennsylvania, that this became like a perk for cooperation. This was a reward. It's
That's
like,
what I was wondering. Did they start using it as a carrot to get them? Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely did. And
Yeah.
the guys who really want to have that level of relatedness with their family, even though they're incarcerated, their behavior changes to model what works. And, they're back and forth with getting these tapes and sending them to their family. And that's an incredible thing. Now,
Yeah.
Ezra, who's never coming out again, now shows up as a leader in the prison, right?
Yeah.
And he's had a qualitative impact on this environment that seems completely intractable. We had other inmates who they started forming study groups because a lot of these guys never even finished high school. So at one point between the Riverfront Penitentiary and the Chester County Prison, where that one guy just escaped like a
Oh
month
yeah.
ago, yeah,
Yeah.
that same prison. I'm like, I know where that is.
The video of it was so ridiculous.
Oh,
You saw that, right? Like the way he climbed the
absolutely,
wall. Yeah, it's like
absolutely. But
nobody thought that
that
was possible. Yeah. Anyway.
no, but that
Yeah.
prison right there, that became the #1 prison in the state of Pennsylvania for inmates to get their GEDs.
Hmm.
Because these guys, realized that they needed to do something. So the inmates made requests to have professors from both Villanova, Delaware County Community College, and Widener, and they would come in and tutor these guys, and and these guys really were invested in getting their GEDs and accomplishing that. I mean, even the simplest one that we had was I remember this one young guy who, his complaint was, I could never interview for, a job in an office. I always had to do, labor. And he said, and it was, well, why? And he says, well, because I didn't know how to tie a tie and I didn't know how to come in. So he created a project to teach other men how to tie a necktie, how to tie a bow tie. Yeah, he didn't know how to do it, right?
Uh-huh.
So we had to teach him how to do it. And then he created this project in order to be able to, teach guys how to do that. And you should see, I mean, then these guys, these inmates, right, in their browns and stuff, they're doing like a Windsor knot, a V-neck.
Dude,
It was amazing,
as soon as I moved to Florida and realized that nobody wears ties down here, I haven't worn a tie in 20 years, dude.
Oh,
Like
sure.
even I'll go suit, no tie. Like I am not wearing a tie. You know what I mean? It's funny. That's so cool though. Have you kept it? Have you kept in touch with anybody from that
Oh,
program?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Oh, I
Are
get
any of
calls.
them doing like wonderful things outside of jail?
Incredible things.
Yeah. Tell me
Incredible
more.
things.
Tell me more.
This one guy, Reno, who coached him years ago. Reno, oop, did I lose you,
You did freeze here for
Justin?
a second. Yeah, I'm here. Your video's
Okay.
frozen. Oh, there you're
Okay.
back. All right.
My video, your video was frozen.
No, it's you, baby. Isn't that the strangest sort of like you're on a lot of Zooms and so am I? Like nobody ever knows who's the problem when that
Uh-huh.
happens.
Well,
You
I
know what I
always,
mean? Like,
I'm
hey,
like,
Zoom, I'm sure you're listening, Zoom. Like, figure out how to like flash a message to tell people who's at fault here. Anyway,
but
sorry. So
so
yeah, what's his
Reno is
name?
a guy.
Ringo.
Reno,
Reno,
Reno.
sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Reno. Reno's
Mhm.
a great guy. He got out of jail, and what employment for him was difficult. He was incarcerated for 15 years,
Mm.
so no work history. He was a former heroin user, so anything before his incarceration wasn't even worth considering, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
here he is, cleaned up and really clear about wanting to succeed and not kind of blow his second chance at life. So he started his own landscaping business. And I
Mm.
mean, with just a lawnmower and clippers. And this guy, I mean, worked like a dog, but he was so happy to be able to not be incarcerated once he got
Yeah.
out. And he recognized that one of the biggest issues for inmates coming out of prison is, employment, and if they can't get employed, it's not going to be too terribly long before they're back being criminals again.
Yeah.
So now Reno, I mean, gosh, he's probably had his business now. Uh, oh, it's probably about 14 or 15 years. I mean,
Hmm.
this guy's a millionaire today, you know,
Hmm.
and he's got at least 60 guys, 70 guys in his crew, and they're almost all of them are all former inmates,
Yeah, that's great.
and he's just created a whole organization um, to encourage them to, every once in a while he's like, Russ, can you come in and can you just, do a work day with us so that we can, kind of come together as an organization and come together as a, create our family of inmates and, get these guys tuned up right, which I'm more than happy to do.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a privilege to sit there and be in a room with like 70 men who, none of them look like they would have gotten a second chance any place.
Hmm.
here they are. They couldn't be more, considerate and engaging and generous with their time. So, Reno's somebody who's been a big, big success, you
That's
know,
awesome.
on the outside.
Why isn't there more of that? How do we multiply that by 1,000? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, our culture doesn't encourage that. You
yeah.
know, our culture is about punishment, right? It's not about rehabilitation. That's a bullshit conversation. It's about punishment. And, to the degree that that's what the narrative of the culture is, we've got what we've got, and it's not really going to shift.
Mhm.
What needs to shift is, having examples, real world examples of guys and ladies who, re-engage in society and show up as transformed individuals, who are now making, an impact, a positive impact on their community. I mean, there's just so many examples that we have, but that's where I got my chops, right?
Yeah,
Because we really worked with these guys, and it was hard,
I bet.
because there was no agreement about doing anything for these guys in the first place,
Mhm.
right? But then what I found very quickly is like, well, if I can work it out with these inmates in jail, these executives are a bunch of they're a joke, right? They're a bunch of pushovers. I'm like, and I have been
Within
face to
5 minutes, you're just like, go do this.
yeah,
Doing
face
it,
to
right?
face with an executive. I'm like, you're a clown. You act
Yeah.
like you're a really tough guy. I know guys that killed people.
Yeah.
You
My last
know,
guy, there was a small chance he would murder me. So,
absolutely.
this is a
Oh,
cakewalk.
I got such a crazy prison story for you, and then we can move on from prison. But there was this one guy. So we're having this conversation, and we're talking about being responsible for your experience, right? The worst thing you can say in prison is to say that someone's a bitch, right? If you're I mean, it just takes everything that it is multiplied as the worst thing commentary you can have. And I'm not completely familiar with exactly how offensive it is. I mean, these are guys that would rather hear the N word than, bitch, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm like, well, we're talking about being responsible for your experience. I said, the truth of the matter is, I see a whole bunch of bitches in here, right? I mean, the warden was in the room and he was like, no, don't say that. And I was like, it's all right. I got it. And it turns out, and I'm explaining to these guys, I'm like, you don't understand. I said, you know, you are a bitch when who you are is a puppet on a string. And if I can pull that string and upset you, then you're just a bitch. Then
Mm.
whether I upset you or I have you dance or I have you sing, you'll do what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it.
Hmm.
Well, there was this guy, Truck, and I don't even really know his real name, but Truck
Truck
was
describes
the
him pretty well, I'm sure.
this dude was the biggest dude in the room, right? And I mean, legs like arms as big as my legs, right? Just massive. He was in for murder, right? And he had done already at this point like 32 or 34 years, right? He was old at some point. He was near the point where he was going to be paroled, and he stands up, and when he stands up in the crowd, like other people's chairs and stuff, like start away. And he's like, I'm nobody's bitch. And I said, you might be mine. And he's like, huh. And I explained, just like I said, if all it takes is for me to call you a bitch, for that to upset you, then I got you
I
and I
already
can do
got you.
whatever I want.
Yeah.
And that's the definition of a bitch.
Hmm.
And he's sitting there and you could tell, I mean, he's like, and I can tell you that when he clenched his fist, which was as big as a lunchbox, right? When he clenched, I mean, you could hear the like the skin like coming together like that. And that's when I realized I think I'm in trouble. Like I was like, oh my god! And all of a sudden he goes, and you see him twist his head, and he goes, ah, and he has kind of like this Robert De Niro like crazy
Yeah.
Cape Fear laugh, like and everybody else in the room is like, you know, they're watching him kind of, you know,
Yeah.
express himself that way. And in that instant, everything changed for this dude, right? Like
Mhm.
he really saw that he was never fully responsible for his own experience. He was
Mhm.
always reacting to what was occurring as opposed to, you know, creating what would occur.
Mhm.
So I mean, it was a night and day difference. Like, you know, the next week when we came back in to do the next seminar, he's like front and center, comes over, handshake, gives me a big hug. I've been waiting for you all week, Mr. Russ. It's so good to see you. Come on in. I got everything set up for you up front so that you're all set. And I'm like, thank you, Chuck. Thank
So
you.
he was your bitch. He was your
Oh,
bitch.
well, you know, listen, I'd never say that. I learned not to say those words, but in a matter of speaking, I said,
Thank you, Truck. Could you go get me some coffee, please?
oh, oh, truck.
By the
But
way, I'm having a problem with these guys in the corner of my
oh
neighborhood.
yeah. Well, you know what was great was nobody would even give me a second glance because you know they're like, oh no, that's Truck's friend, you know,
Oh,
and oh yeah, oh
that's
yeah. I
funny.
mean, he was running a lot of the show there, you know,
Hmm.
and because he was just massive. He was literally the biggest man I'd ever seen in my life,
Mhm.
you know, muscular wise and stuff, and he was tough as bulls.
Mhm.
So you know, but all of that goes into, you know, that's where we kind of developed the whole narrative of, you know, really getting past this condition of this tranquilized obviousness or the suchness of things for people. And it just really revolutionized both how I would interact with folks and you know, and it gave me a whole lot of bravado because again, I don't give a rat's ass what the executive has to say about anything. Like, listen, I all I know is there's nothing going to happen here. You know, you're not going to do anything to me.
So
You
that
know,
goes. I've been wanting to ask this question for like 45 minutes. It, is anybody uncoachable, or have you ever said to an executive or an inmate or anybody like, you know what, this isn't working, you're fired?
I know it's funny because I've had folks where that's not the conversation. Like, I don't declare it like that.
Of course.
No, but I come at them and I'm like, you know, I look at where we're working right now.
Mhm.
And, you know, I don't have an experience of you being serious. You know, I think, you know, you're in here, maybe you were curious about something. Maybe you wanted to kind like whether you're curious whether I'm talking to an inmate or I'm talking to an executive. Maybe you were curious, what does coaching look like? You know, what is this like? But I don't have the experience of you being serious about it, you know. And I'm available to work with you as soon as you recognize the futility of the direction you're in. And if you don't, you know, you'll have all the consequences that come with not recognizing that.
Mm.
And the moment you realize maybe there's some way that you can be contributed to, you know, let me know because I'm ready to do that.
Mhm.
So, you know, but that conversation right there usually is enough to turn people around because then they're like in the oh shit of it all. And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, they might disappear for a week or two or something like that, and then you know, I get a call. You know, I've been thinking about what you said. And,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
That's so, I spent a long career in sales. I think everybody's in sales in one way or another, but that's called the takeaway,
Uh huh.
right? Like, here's this wonderful thing that you say you want right
Right.
now. And you know what? I don't think it's for you.
Yeah.
So, you
That's
know
it.
what? Yeah. And
I wish you the
it
best
is the
of luck.
most, yeah, it's the most wonderful, brain fuck, if you will,
Yeah. Sure.
that you can use on people because they're like, no, at that point, they're like way back in the, what do they call it? The
The
Abdullah
amygdala.
oblongata in your lizard brain. That's what I like to call it. They're
Uh
like,
huh.
no, I need that now. I need it. I need
Yeah.
it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's amazing how much of that goes on in our brains that we don't realize.
Absolutely.
Like, and I'm no expert, obviously, but I read and I watch podcasts of psychologists and things, and it's like often you've made your decision about what you're going to do about very important things and mundane things as well in that part of your brain that you're not even aware of. It's
Sure.
below the conscious level,
Absolutely.
and your big old, cerebral cortex just spends time convincing you that the decision you already made is the right one.
Sure. Sure it is. But
Yeah, and yeah,
I've
go ahead.
never had the experience of dealing with anyone who wasn't, coachable, like after that conversation.
Really?
Because,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, again, it's about looking at what their experiences are, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here you've done everything that you thought you needed to do, and you're still not succeeding.
Yeah.
So, do
I
you
think
want to?
there's a self-selection variable in there that you talked about before, right? Like the
Sure.
sort of person that would admit they need coaching.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like there's probably a personality type, it's probably the dark triad, right? Machiavellian, uh,
Sure.
psychopath, and what's the other, I forget the other one. But would never think that that anybody could tell them the right thing to do, right? And so
Sure.
they would never seek coaching. I think that personality exists. It's just you
I
probably would
haven't had
run
to,
into it. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
because they don't seek coaching, right?
that's right. It resolves itself.
One way or another. One way or another. I don't know. Some of them seem to do very well. Like I've
Well,
seen a stuff
you need a little sprinkle of psychopathy in order to, be a successful CEO.
to be the top. Yeah, to be the top. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like,
absolutely.
and everybody thinks they want to do that, right? And it's like, really, you want to work 120 hours a week and be like, in some ways you have to be ruthless
Yeah,
and and
you have to disassociate,
you
your
have to have
feel
with your
from
feelings and your
the
family,
business.
friends, and
Yeah,
everything. And it like, yeah, I don't think actually most people when they get there would enjoy it. Like
uh,
I was, I was watching one of my, I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I've
sure.
come to love George Harrison probably more than any of them.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of it is, his sort of philosophical search, religious search, right? But philosophy too. And I just watched it's a great documentary by Martin Scorsese. I forget, it's on one of the streaming channels, but about him. And he talks about, we had a very strange experience. When we were, teenagers, all we wanted, like any other teenagers, was to be rich and famous and, you know, be the best musicians in the world.
Sure.
By 22, I had that. And then I realized it's not anything good.
Yeah,
Like it's nice, sure, but it's like I'm not fulfilled. I'm not satisfied. I don't feel like I'm, you know, a positive thing in the world. And
sure.
so that's why he started, with with Hinduism and all sorts of meditation and all sorts
Sure.
of Hare Krishna and all that sort of things, which it's a fascinating story. But yeah, I think that's really a place where people get hung up, and I have in my life for sure, is like chasing these sort of ideals that somebody else says is what you really want.
Oh, sure.
You know what I
Okay.
mean? And by that I
Well,
mean, money and success and,
yeah. Yeah.
being the CEO or whatever that
Sure.
thing is, the golden goose, and I
Dude,
pe-
that
I
is
think
so perceptive, man.
I
It
think
really
people, and dude, it took me 50 years to figure this out.
I I'm right there with you. No, listen, I know the reason I'm so in line with what you're saying is I realized, about 20 years ago, actually, at that transition when I was now the stay-at-home parent and
Hmm.
Melissa was the full-time,
Hmm.
breadwinner. I mean, that's a complete role reversal.
Yeah,
And, there wasn't the stay-at-home dad conversation in our culture. A stay-at-home dad was a failure, right?
yeah.
That's what the culture had to say.
Hmm.
And I was just so wrought with guilt and shame and embarrassment because I was like, even though this is what I chose to do, I feel so inadequate and so insufficient. And it took me, I had to wallow in that for like a year or two before I realized, what I need to do is I need to redefine success for myself.
Hmm.
And that's what, like, when that insight occurred for me, then all of a sudden I didn't give a shit what anybody else had to say. Like, I really realized, I have the privilege and the opportunity to be an extraordinary dad. I have the privilege and the opportunity to be a tremendous husband. I have freedoms that I wouldn't have in any other conventional, situation for myself. And it just really liberated me from, that dogma that, our society drives about, this is what success looks like. And over the years, I mean, I look back and I look at, especially, it was much more chronic, in, like, my late 30s into my late 40s. I'm surprised by how many friends, that I knew in high school, who were having heart attacks and dying, who committed suicide, and I was like, holy shit, like, I really, there but for the grace of God go I, is what I
Yeah,
was, and
totally. I'm sorry.
no, 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 I'm just saying
I'm just
it.
so excited to add to this because I'm going through this right now, right?
Are you?
And like, so, August, after close to 30 years doing one thing, selling technology but I spent the past probably couple years in that space that you're talking about, like
Sure.
waking up in the morning and sort of dreading the day and having
Yeah.
nothing to look forward to. And oh my God, I have to go do this bullshit and that bullshit. And, I lost in looking back now, I spent a good part of that time. Like, I mean, part of it is I just like puzzles. So I get a new puzzle, a new thing to solve. And that was cool. And you
Hmm.
get success and money and all these things. And, that drove it for a long time. And I had a small little family and, it was the right thing to do. But the last couple of years, I started to feel like, and you and I messaged a little bit about this, like,
Sure.
this sucks. I don't understand why I'm still doing this. And and it took a while. Like, I started talking to my wife about it, like, this isn't good for me and I need to make a change. And she saw it and she understood. And, we spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. And
Sure.
2 months ago, I was like, okay, I quit. And I'm just trying to do some new things that I've always wanted to try and things that I think will make me happy if I can figure out how to make money doing them.
Sure.
and
Sure.
and so I've gone through that experience and I look back and I look at, I mean, between you and me, right? Like, obviously that's not true, but I look at all the folks that I used to work with and what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Uh-huh.
And I even had, after I did this thing, many more people than I thought called me like, what are you doing? I've been thinking about this too, like
Sure.
that
Sure.
sort of thing. Right. So it's
Sure.
like, I think we all get caught in that trap somehow, but I can't tell you how liberating it's been and how much, sort of positive things, at least personally, like you got to start inside,
Yeah.
like the 7 habits, everything starts inside you. And then
Sure.
if you get good enough at that, then you can start trying to fix some other things outside of you. But it's just been a really positive experience. I jumped out of the airplane, didn't without, I haven't figured out how to pull a parachute yet, but
Sure.
that's exciting and fun. And I just wish that people would think about those things more, and it's funny too, because I'm watching my son, who's
Uh-huh.
20
Uh-huh.
and doesn't know what he wants to do with his life.
Sure.
And, many of his friends, it's less so than when you and I were that age. I think you probably know, but many of his
Sure.
friends have decided I'm going to be a doctor and going off to college and doing that
Sure.
thing. And it's like,
Sure.
he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I just keep telling him, dude, that's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to know,
Lucky for him. Lucky
Yeah,
for him. It's not you.
exactly. The most important thing is just keep trying different stuff,
That's right.
And
I
so,
can't tell you how
yeah.
many, doctors, lawyers, accountants, like CFOs and stuff, miserable.
Hmm.
For years we had a relationship with a whole bunch of executives at Deloitte, right?
Hmm.
These guys are, top of the pyramid there. Deloitte,
Yeah.
one of the top firms in the country, you know,
Partners make amazing amounts of money, like
ridiculous,
seven
rid-
figure type
yeah,
deals. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
ridiculous amount of money, right?
Hmm.
They have all the trappings of success.
Hmm.
And so many of those guys were, on coke, or had mistresses or gambling issues. Like they had all these different behaviors, where they were just reckless,
Hmm.
and they were miserable. And,
Hmm.
I mean, I just kind of, I'm lucky enough to get a peek behind the curtain. I'm like, because I looked, I said, oh, not me, and I
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
that's what I wanted once upon a time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was there, man. I mean, I did very well for a while, like, and yeah, I was miserable. And
yeah,
like it enables certain things that, I got to do some awesome traveling and have some
sure.
really cool experiences, and that's a positive, but the rest of it, you can have
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
you know?
If you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks of vacation,
Yeah, out
and
of
the rest of the
52.
year
Yeah.
sucks.
Exactly.
Like,
And there were two really big influences. Yeah, I'm a book guy, right? So there were two really big ones that had an impact on me. And the first is, Tim Ferriss,
yeah,
4 hour work week.
yeah, yeah. The four
And
different.
and part of that book is this, right? It's like people spend 40 years, basically their entire adult lives,
Mm-hmm.
working towards this thing called retirement
Uh-huh.
and making all of these sacrifices daily,
Mm-hmm.
just like you're saying, to get there. And then they get there and it sucks. And it's
Oh,
like,
it's
I wish
terrible.
I could have, like, in his whole message is like, retire in little bits all the
Sure,
time,
sure.
like go do those things that you think you want to do in retirement now, because
Yeah,
you'll enjoy them better. And who knows if you'll ever get there.
yeah.
So it's that one. And then the other one is this guy, the Stephen Pressfield. He wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance.
Okay, sure.
And he had his situation is more like Reno's,
Uh-huh.
where he's a writer in his mind, in his brain, and but had this thing called resistance,
Mm-hmm.
which and he wrote this book about it. It's called the War of Art. So not the art of war, but the
Yeah.
War of Art. It's
Uh-huh.
a fabulous book. I recommend it to everybody. Stephen Pressfield, the War of Art, and it's all about resistance. It's all
Right.
about, you know you're unhappy, you're doing drugs, you're an alcoholic, whatever's going negative in your life, that is your inner person saying, this is not for me.
Right.
And there's this thing that you want to do, and for him it's being an author, it might be an artist, it might be start a new business, it might be,
Sure.
teach inmates how to read to their
Right,
kids or
Todd.
whatever, right? But it's that is resistance, and
Yeah,
it is talking to you, and it is dominating your life. And the
indeed.
book is about how to beat resistance, and it's fucking amazing. It's
That's
really
great.
cool.
I'll
Yeah,
I'll definitely pick that one up too.
yeah.
No, it's interesting, man, because it's scary. It's funny because right before we started this podcast, I was just dealing with a 36-year-old, very successful attorney. At one point, this kid was the youngest uh, adjunct attorney general in the country.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, like I mean, this kid was top of his. He was a Dartmouth undergrad and a Columbia Law graduate, top of the class, like number one.
So he did okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, here he was. He was doing working in some of the top law firms in D.C. I mean, his starting salary was 350 grand.
Mhm.
And at the time he was like 26. I mean, it was remarkable, right?
Yeah.
28, 26, 28, something like that. But I'm dealing with him today, and he's just heartbroken. Like life is terrible. He lives in Colorado. He's in this incredible, I mean, mansion of a house.
I bet.
So he's got that. He's got the newest Audi. He's got an absolutely stunningly beautiful wife, two beautiful kids, but he doesn't see them because he is just feverishly working all the time.
Hmm.
And I was just having this conversation, and he's been a client of mine for about 6 years on and off. The last 2 years, pretty much full time. And I'm just dealing with him. I'm like, listen, man, you're 36, going to be 37 in April. You've got your beautiful wife. She's got a baby due in March. You need to make an adjustment. There is no balance in your life here. And all I can tell you is you are, with your foot on the pedal, going straight into the wall of a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And when that hits, it's going to be a nightmare for you. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, it doesn't matter how nice your house is, doesn't matter how beautiful your wife is, doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. If you're miserable, you're miserable.
Mm.
And you're going to realize the futility of all this work.
Mhm.
And so he's been coming around because he's starting to recognize. He's like, I just thought I was frustrated because I wasn't successful enough. And I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
your game, the game you're playing is trying to chase the horizon. You're never going to
Yeah.
get there.
It's the
You know,
rabbit running around the track, man. Those poor
it's
dogs never catch it.
oh,
You
it's
know?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, and that literally, that was the call I had just before I got on here, just trying to impress upon him.
Hmm.
You want to take a look at really where you're at and be really honest with yourself,
Hmm.
because at some point, you still think you have time, and there's going to be a point in your life when all of a sudden you recognize, where did it go?
Hmm.
You know, how has it been, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? I'm now in conversations. I was talking to one of my friends where I grew up on my as a child on my block, and I'm like, are we talking about some shit that happened 40 years ago now? Are we in the 40-year memory, bank?
Oh,
I'm like, what?
talk
I'm
about
like,
not owning your experience, right?
yeah. I'm like, he's like, Russ, 40 years ago we were 15, 14 and 15. And I'm like, I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, geez.
Oops. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
you're
it's
so much older
shocking.
than I am, so
Not that older than you, for God's sake.
yeah. So yeah, and it's funny that that person is a lawyer because I think that's a big piece of it too. And everybody's different for sure, but like I feel like you mentioned accountants, lawyers,
Doctors.
financiers,
Oh
those sort
yeah.
of people that like don't actually make anything.
Uh-huh.
Nothing that you can say, I painted that, or
Right.
I helped to build that. Like I know people that'll be like, you're driving through town and like, I helped build that building.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I think that plays into it. I think there's a certain, I don't know whether it's memento mori or something like, remember we're all going to die, like something you can leave behind that
Sure.
I was here, I contributed, I did
Yeah.
something positive. And that's
Sure.
kids, but it can also be your professional life too, right? Like, and I think people that don't have that, I'm just some lawyer that files briefs and argues for clients so they can make a bunch of money. Like, what did you actually do? Now
It's
you could be a lawyer that sues for a better, cleaner water or something like that, and
sure.
that'd be something wonderful. But I think that's part of it, man. What do you think about that?
I agree. I agree that, we want to have an impact, right?
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, if your presence doesn't make an impact, your absence doesn't make a difference. And, and if you're gone and nobody cares, who were you? Right?
Hmm.
I mean, it's just like the wind, right? It's just it's here or it's not.
Yeah.
So,
It's
it
interesting though because the other piece of that, you take that further and you zoom out more.
uh-huh.
We're all the wind, like
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know what I
sure.
mean. Like you go over millennia, and it's like whose name do you remember? There's like five guys.
Dude, that is so true. That is
Yeah.
so, it's funny because I've I was recently just kind of in this self-reflection for myself. And I was wondering, I'm like, who who are these people that I came from? Like,
Mhm.
I know, I have my parents, I had relationship with my grandparents. I had relationships with some of my great grandparents. They were still alive,
Mhm.
but that's only part of them. Some of them, right?
That's
And it kind of stuns me. I mean, I think of generations of people, and I'm like, I only can go back 100 years, maybe 120 years, maybe, where I can say, oh, this was my great grandfather Carlos,
yeah.
my great grandmother Dominga,
Mhm.
I. But other than that, what do I have? Who are these people?
So I was driving, and this is years ago, but I was driving through, from one meeting to another, and through just like, God's country. I don't even remember where it was. Just somewhere out in the middle of nowhere.
Uh huh.
And I drove by this little farmhouse, and just off to the side of the farmhouse was this old cemetery,
Uh huh.
and there were hundreds of graves.
Wow.
And I'm like, good grief.
Yeah.
That person knows who their grandfather's grandfather is.
Yeah.
At
Sure.
least the name and the date, something about it. And it's so different than the modern world. It's sort of like you're saying. It's like, yeah, I mean, if you go back just a couple hundred years, I mean, people, their entire families lived in the same town for, 20
Oh,
generations. And
sure.
everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew everybody's business and their family and all those things. And
Uh huh.
none of that is true.
None of that
Like, to your
exists.
point, I don't go back past my grandparents.
No.
I do. If I did, I must have been so young I don't remember. I don't believe I ever met any great grandparents.
Uh huh.
So it's like, yeah, it's just, it's like we're gone. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And it's as quick as that.
Yeah, yeah. So that comes from this TED talk I saw. There's a guy trying to answer the question, why haven't we seen aliens yet?
Uh huh.
Okay. And this is a physicist talking. He's like, because time is too long and space is too vast.
Sure.
So in other words, 15 billion years or whatever the number is, this universe has been around, you know, I'll shortcut it. This species has been around for a couple 100,000 years. We've
Yeah.
been writing stuff for about 10,000 years. We've been sending stuff to space for like 50 years. It's like
Yeah.
that.
That's
And who
right.
says we'll be here 50 years from now, right? So that's the problem, is to get to see some other society, when these societies, if you think of the universe as this little box the size of my little picture here and about 10 minutes long, these presumably these us are and then there's
Yeah.
no here.
Yeah.
They never find each other.
That's right.
Isn't
That's
that
right.
interesting? Yeah.
It is.
And if they did live so long, like, why would they care who we are? It's
Right.
like,
We would just be,
yeah, it's the
a
anthill on the side of the
sophisticated
highway.
ape.
Yeah, 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 yeah. A chimp that ate mushrooms, right?
That's it. That's right. That's
I
right.
think that feels like where we should end it. Is let's all go be chimps and eat some mushrooms. What do you think?
Yeah. Cheers. I know somebody with some blue caps. I haven't had them, but I know they exist.
Yeah, that's cool. So, before we go though, do you want to plug your business? You want to tell us how to get in touch with you, where to go, what to do, that sort of thing?
Oh, listen, of course. Listen, everything can be on our website. It's QMax,
Hmm.
Q-Max Technologies.com.
Hmm.
I can be reached through the emails that are on there. We're available to work with executives and as individuals or their teams or the entire organizations on what it is to create breakthrough effectiveness and alter their cultures and design them intentionally.
That's
So,
so cool. I would highly recommend it. So that's so cool. Thanks
thank
so much for doing this, Russ. It's been
cool.
quite a
Justin,
pleasure.
I
Yeah,
hope we get to do something again.
we will. Don't worry.
All right, brother.
Have a good day.
You too. Take care. Bye bye.
Hey, all right, it's the country. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Justin Weller. Here we rely on premium subscribers to produce this show and all of our content. If you like what we're doing, would you consider heading over to www.thecountry.news, where you can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. Please also subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this show, and follow us on the X, where you'll find us under the handle @JWTheCountry. Thanks so much.